Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 19 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Dish, absent. Councilmember Harrison,
Here.
Councilmember Song, absent. Councilmember Watson,
Here.
Councilmember Radina,
Here.
Councilmember Ghazi Edwin,
Here.
Mayor Taylor,
Here.
Councilmember Iyer, here. Councilmember Ackman, absent. Councilmember Briggs, here. Councilmember Cornell, absent. We have a quorum.
We have a motion, please, to approve the agenda. Moved by Councilmember Medina, second by Councilmember Watson. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. Can I have a motion, please? Do we have communications today from our city administrator?
No, Mayor.
We now come to we have no introductions. We now come to public comment general time. In order to speak at public comment, one must have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you, or the time clock will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Our first speaker today is Ken Garber.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. So nice to be here with you tonight. My name is Ken Garber. I live in the 2nd Ward. In 1977, I was a U of M undergrad taking physics classes. That year, a U of M physics professor, Mark Ross, proposed transitioning buildings from gas furnaces to heat pumps. He wrote a report to Congress on this. At that time, climate change was not yet a thing. Ross's argument was based on thermodynamic efficiency. The second law of thermodynamics states that the total disorder or entropy of the universe is constantly increasing, but also that any system not at maximum entropy can be made to do useful work. Such a system could be two spaces that differ in temperature, like a building in winter. The second law implies that you can use work to move heat from the cold outside to the inside, which is the principle behind a heat pump. The work is done by an electric motor, which compresses a refrigerant, gas, into a liquid, raising its temperature. Amazingly, a heat pump can be more than 100% efficient, much more. A heat pump coefficient of performance today is between 2 and 4, or 200% to 400% more heat energy created than electrical energy expended. That's the second law in action. Compare that to the highest efficiency gas furnaces at 97%. They can never reach 100%. Gas furnaces exploit the first law of thermodynamics, which states that different forms of energy are interchangeable. They convert the chemical energy of natural gas into heat energy, but combustion is never 100% efficient or complete. A heat pump, based on the second law, is 2 to 4 times more efficient than a gas furnace. That's why Mark Ross told Congress we should use heat pumps. Even back then, burning gas was a thermodynamically stupid way to heat buildings. Fast forward 45 years, we have a climate emergency. And you have an agenda item CA11, the Elevate contract, to electrify buildings. Let me dispel the myth that electrification increases greenhouse gas emissions. A speaker at the December 6th Planning Commission meeting noted that DTE's gas-fired power plants have a 50 to 60% burn efficiency. He said, quote, "Full electrification of these buildings would just be taking a small amount of emissions out of Ann Arbor while introducing a large amount of emissions at a power source," end quote. You also see this argument on social media. It's incorrect. It only takes the first law of thermodynamics into account, not the second law and heat pumps, which more than cancel out combustion and efficiency at the power source. When you're converting electrical energy to heat energy at 400% efficiency, you have lower emissions. Heat pumps, even using dirty DTE power, are twice as clean as gas-heated buildings. So pass TA 11 tonight. Thank you for your service on City Council.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Francis Todoro Hargraves.
Good evening. My name is Frances Todoro Hargreaves. I am the chair of the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, and I'd like to take a few minutes to comment on agenda item CA 13, which is the resolution to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Ann Arbor and the Ann Arbor Police Officers Association. ICPOC has a very specific charge, which is to oversee the actions, policies, and complaints made regarding Ann Arbor Police Department. Beginning in 2020, City Council and the City Administrator invited ICPOC to provide comments and feedback on police contracts. Since this time, representatives of ICPOC have also begun occasional meetings with union representatives. It has been a positive practice to share thoughts, ideas, and simply to converse on a variety of matters. We appreciate, once again, the invitation to be involved in this underlying contract. During our March 2022 meeting, the Commission leadership requested comments from the Commissioners regarding the POA contract. In April, leadership of the ICPOC met with the City Administrator, Mr. Dehoney, and his team to provide 3 items of feedback. One was the end of arbitration in cases of termination, which is something that we understand is a challenging topic, not just at the local level, but also at the national level. Second was a request for the ability to transfer or reassign officers. This was already in the contract and was clarified to commissioners during the meeting. The last request was one carried over from previous contract, which was to have all written discipline to be considered as part of progressive discipline for up to 7 years. While the current underlying contract that is before you is not for 7 years, it is now for 4, which is an improvement from 2, and this is progress. Lastly, there are 2 items I'd like to point out that have been added to Articles 5 and 6. Article 5, Section 7 now includes 7 additional major infractions that have been specifically stated for immediate suspension or termination. This is progress. In Article 6, Section 3E, Step 4 includes an additional option of mediation through the Michigan Employment Relations Commission prior to arbitration. This is an additional optional opportunity for the parties to resolve issues prior to arbitration. This is progress. ICPOC will continue to work closely with Mr. Dehoney, his team, the police chief and her leadership, and the unions to advocate for positive change through oversight. The simple truth is we all have the same goal, to have the best police department to respond to emergencies and protect the safety of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Adam Goodman.
Hi, good evening. So attached to the agenda tonight is a memo about the East Medical Center Bridge Widening Project. And before I get into what that says, I want to remind you all of a few things. This area, East Medical Center and Fuller, is one of the most important connections for people walking and biking in the entire city. It's the linchpin in pretty much any conceivable commuting route between north and central campuses, and it's also a key link in the county-wide border-to-border trail. Now, the bridge proposal itself is going to add a new 11-foot lane for cars, and in doing so, all the designs I've seen, it will increase pedestrian crossing distances and conflict points at the Fuller intersection, which is already a dangerous intersection on a priority corridor identified in our transportation plan. The bridge widening project, therefore, will reduce pedestrian and bike safety and lead to increased car traffic, which runs entirely counter. Our city has goals to do the exact opposite of both of those things. And yet, the bridge widening proposal adds not 1 inch of net new space on the bridge for people walking and biking. It only proposes to remove sidewalk space from one side and put it on the other, which is a terrible idea that will make things worse, frankly. So the one fig leaf that council did include for people walking and biking was to direct the design contract to include an analysis of a pathway underneath the bridge. There's no commitment to actually fund construction, but I guess that doesn't matter now, because the memo on your agenda seems to say that the analysis is done, and it's not possible, because Building the pathway would infringe on MDOT's right-of-way for the train tracks, and they won't grant us permission to do that. So, to say this is disappointing, well, it's really more like adding insult to injury, because this is already a bad project. When some of you voted a year ago to approve it, you characterized this as a compromise with benefits for all road users. It was not, and that's even more clear tonight. It was a complete and utter capitulation that runs counter to our city's safety and climate goals. Now, I certainly hope you can come up with a way to salvage the situation, and maybe my friends Mr. Houck and Mr. Deck have thoughts on that, but I'm not optimistic. It seems like we're pretty locked into a course of action. So I guess instead what I'm asking for you to do tonight is just take a moment to appreciate the depths of your failure. Your failure to take actions consistent with our city's stated goals and values. Your failure to perform due diligence on a project before committing the city to infrastructure, which we will have to live with for generations. And your failure to listen to your constituents and your own transportation commission, who tried very hard to warn you that this is a bad proposal. And I'm asking you to do this because the only thing I really hope comes out of this is that the next time you're faced with something like this, you'll remember this experience and do better. Thank you.
Thank you. I will remind members of the audience that we are only permitted to have one person speaking at a time. That courtesy is extended to all speakers. That is a council rule. Our next speaker is Peter Houck.
Hi, council members. Good to see you back here in person again and see some of you for the first time. I'm Peter Houck. I'm a 4th Ward resident. I'm also on the Transportation Commission, but tonight I'm speaking only as a resident, a cyclist, and a frequent user of Fuller Road. The AC1 memo filed with tonight's agenda describes how the non-motorized path has been removed from East Medical Center Drive project because MDOT has denied us permission to build in their right-of-way. This is very disappointing, to say the least. A year ago, council approved a car-centric plan to widen and rehab the bridge, but at least it was supposed to include a design for the non-motorized connection under Fuller. Today, all we have is a plan for the car bridge. We don't have a viable design for the non-motorized improvements. I really like the concept that our budgets and our spending are a reflection of our values. I've heard that here, and I agree with it. I was not in favor of widening the bridge for vehicle traffic. And now the non-motorized path under East Medical Center Drive has been removed. And this project very much does not reflect my values. Spending $10 million on a car bridge infrastructure with no solid plan for the non-motorized connection underneath sends a very strong message about what we really do value in this community. Pardon me. It's my turn to talk now.
Ma'am, please do not interrupt the speaker again.
I'm not against maintaining existing car infrastructure in Ann Arbor, but we already have enough, or maybe too much of it. We don't have enough safe and easy options for non-motorized transportation. Looking at the purchase order for the bridge reconstruction that's on January 9th's agenda, an outsider would likely assume that our community values are the opposite of mine. It looks like we don't have enough car infrastructure yet. We need more lanes, and we're going to do whatever it takes and pay whatever it costs to make it happen. Non-motorized improvements, we'll figure those out later. The current proposal is that we do the prep work under the bridge and come back later to make the path. This plan didn't work out great in 1982, nor in the 40 years since. There's been a path under the bridge waiting for us to connect the Fuller sidewalk to it since 1982 when the bridge was new. Now the bridge is 40 years old and crumbling, and we're prepared to spend $10 million rehabbing and widening it, but still we can't come up with a viable plan to connect the non-motorized path. So what I'm asking of you, firstly, please, before January 9th, go back and check if this proposal for a $10 million expenditure on car-only improvements really aligns with your values. Secondly, don't forget that if it doesn't align with your values, you can ask for something better. You can ask for a solid plan to improve non-motorized transportation in this area before you approve the expenditure on this bridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mojan Savabi-Asafani.
Hello, Ann Arbor. I'm here and I see very many seats of those who won the last election empty. They're not here. However, this new Ann Arbor City Council is to the liking of our mayor, our racist mayor, and I call him a racist. And Ayer has got up and left, and she's waving goodbye. Well, we can't wait to see you go. But the point is that this new city council is not going to bend to the will of our racist mayor. And I call him a racist because he has proven himself to be a racist for the past however many years he's been here. He has turned his back to the rights of the Palestinians repeatedly while pretending that he cares for human rights. He doesn't. This city council has repeatedly turned their back to rights of Palestinian people. This city council calls itself progressive. Now I want to investigate that. Can you be a progressive when you have had all the time in the world to propose $15 minimum wage for every worker in Ann Arbor? Mr. Travis Radina, we're not stupid. Some workers, few workers in Ann Arbor have that, but not everyone. So can you be called progressive if you have never, not even to this moment, proposed $15 minimum wage for every worker in Ann Arbor? No. The answer is no. You're not progressive. Can you be a progressive city council member or a city council at all if you turn your back to the rights of the Palestinians? The answer to that, again, is no. You cannot call yourself progressive when you turn your back consistently on the rights of the Palestinian people while supporting a racist apartheid state that is called Israel. Now, the good news is that a lot of Democrat people in America, people who call themselves Democrat, have become sympathetic to the Palestinian human rights. The bulk of the young who call themselves New Democrats, Socialist Democrats, whatever else they call themselves, they stand with people of Palestine. They stand with the rights of the Palestinians. Those are the ones who will be voting for you guys. So, come up with a way that you can please them too. I would like to see this resolution passed because you're human beings. This resolution, we are against military aid to Israel. But my experience says that you're not human beings. You do not support this, but support it for those who will vote for you.
Thank you.
And don't you ever thank me again, you racist.
Thank you.
Have you called my name?
Our next speaker is Blaine Coleman.
This city council is all about global issues when it suits them, such as global warming. But the global issue of Palestinian human rights is something this city council has run from ever since January of 1984. Remember that the United States gives many billions of dollars every year to the Israeli military. Remember that Israel was a staunch ally of apartheid South Africa. Israel was a staunch ally of apartheid South Africa because they are the same. Remember that Israel has massacred thousands of Palestinians, thousands of Lebanese with your tax dollars. Remember that. Ayer has just come back to the room. Ayer, whose campaign took money from old friends of the Israel Defense Forces, has now returned to the room after her boycott. Remember that the base of your party, the progressive base of your party, is now for Palestinian human rights, and you ought to get with the program and be with that progressive base. They are your future. Taylor's not your future. The progressive base of the Democratic Party is your future. Get with them. Vote for the resolution. We are against military aid to Israel. Get with this resolution. It's virtually the same resolution
that your own Ann Arbor Human Rights Commission pushed on you almost 20 years ago. In 2003, your Ann Arbor Human Rights Commission pushed for you to do a resolution saying essentially, we are against military aid to Israel. Do it. Especially now. Israel has elected an extraordinarily right-wing, violent, racist government. Their new police minister in charge of tens of thousands of Israeli police is a guy named Ben-Gvir, B-E-N-G-V-I-R. Ben-Gvir had a portrait of Baruch Goldstein in his home until recently. Who was Baruch Goldstein? Baruch Goldstein was the Israeli officer who murdered 29 Palestinian worshipers while they were worshiping in their mosque. All that murder, all that death should not be paid for with your tax dollars, should it? No, it shouldn't.
Thank you. Our next speaker
Taylor is not your future. Taylor is not your future.
You are not authorized to speak further at public comment. Our next speaker is Larry Deck. Of course.
I'd like to speak also about the, I believe it's item AC1 on your agenda regarding the East Medical Center Drive Bridge, the memo you got about the problem with the connections to the underpass there. First of all, one good thing about the design that was in the packet, it widens the pad underneath the bridge from the pad that's there now, so that's good, and it's also higher, which is good. The downside is that, as you know, they ran into a problem with MDOT. They found out apparently in May that they couldn't run the trail because of MDOT needs to approve, because there's a slight intrusion onto the MDOT right-of-way. I guess I would ask you to direct your staff to see in the intervening 7 months, have they actually looked into that? Have they tried to get approval from MDOT? It seems like it should be a simple thing. My measurements of the path in Vandermeer Park between the railroad and river there, the path there is closer to the railroad than it would be here, and there's a fence, so why not just put up a fence in the East Medical area like it is in Vandermeer Park? It seems like that should be a fairly straightforward thing to do with MDOT. Also, just on the wider issue of the whole fiasco with the East Medical Center Bridge, we had a broken process, as those of you who were here during the last year know, and you witnessed it firsthand. The people who were not on council at the time maybe witnessed it from the outside. But there was a profound lack of public input on the process. I blame that partly on COVID and the difficulty of making connection with people about, and really having a dialogue about what was needed. The upshot was that faulty instructions were given to the contractor for the design, apparently under pressure from the university, to actually narrow the west sidewalk where the west sidewalk needs to be widened. In your January meeting, you'll be called upon, I believe, to approve that contract. Well, I hope that in the meantime, we can somehow resolve the mistakes that have been made and redirect the design of that to widen that west sidewalk. Is important for connectivity. It would be a $10 million mistake that would last us for 40 years probably if we go ahead as planned. The city and the university have their carbon neutrality plans, which both call for a substantial increase in biking and walking. However, the plan as designed here actually flies in the face of that, makes it more difficult for biking and walking and less safe for biking and walking. So, if we don't change this, we'll be throwing out the cities and universities' carbon neutrality plans out the window, and we shouldn't do that. We've got some important issues here. We need to address it, and I'm always hopeful that we can address those before we make a big mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Briggs.
I want to thank the speakers who have come to talk about East Medical Center Drive Bridge. As folks can expect, I'm also a little concerned about what we learned in the memo, and I'll be working with staff in the meantime to understand what our options are. I do think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that as we approve projects that they are in alignment with our goals. Secondly, I'd like to thank the folks from the community who came out to Fifth Ward constituent office hours yesterday. We had a nice gathering. I anticipate doing those again on a monthly basis. Unfortunately, Jen Cornell couldn't come because she was sick, as are many of the council members around the table this evening, as you see the empty chairs, as is one member going to attend to a very ill mother. Finally, I'd just like to call our attention to public speaking rules. We have some members of the public who kind of consistently violate those, particularly rule number 6, which includes members of the public holding up signs must sit in the back row of chairs so that their signs do not interfere with others. There's a few other issues there as well. Hope we might attend to that in the future.
Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. I also just wanted to make a comment about the East Medical Center Bridge. Folks may recall when that came up earlier this year, I was strongly opposed to widening the bridge strictly for cars. I remain that way. And this news that we got through the memo is very disappointing. And for me, I don't know that I'll be able to vote for this contract when it comes to us in January if we don't have a plan in place for pedestrian connection in that area. It doesn't conform with our A20 goals. It doesn't conform with our Vision Zero goals and plans that have been extensively vetted by the community. I do feel like we were strong-armed into this by the university, and I don't appreciate it. And I'm willing to wait and make sure that we get it right rather than make a mistake. Thank you.
Councilmember Ghazi Edwin.
Thank you. So I just want to announce that I have my January 14th coffee hour coming up at Mallett's Creek Library at 11 a.m. It's part of my monthly commitment to continue engaging with constituents, so monthly coffee hours. I also want to share some updates from the Human Rights Commission. I'm happy to be returning as the liaison, previously serving as a commissioner for the last 3 years. The Human Rights Commission has received some complaints that there may be Ann Arbor housing providers allegedly trying to circumvent the Fair Chance Access to Housing Ordinance, which is an ordinance that eliminates the use of legal history to be considered by housing providers in tenant selection. These housing providers allege that the ordinance does not apply to them because their offices are not physically located within the city of the city of Ann Arbor. The Fair Chance Access to Housing Ordinance is clear. Housing providers, irrespective of where their offices are located, must abide by this ordinance if leasing property within the city limits. There are some posters and other materials that are being updated to make sure that this is not ambiguous, and the city's communications department is working on that. And the commission requests that if you know anyone who may have experienced this discrimination, please encourage them to file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. You can email them at hrc@a2gov.org, and you can also find their contact information on the city's website. Similarly, we've received some complaints about potential violations of source of income, which is discrimination against source of income, which is part of our non-discrimination ordinance, or essentially that housing providers must treat vouchers like cash. Again, if you feel you've experienced this discrimination or know someone who has, please contact the Human Rights Commission and file a complaint. Thank you.
Further communication from council. I would like to request confirmation of the following appointments that were presented to City Council for consideration at the December 5, 2022 regular session: to the Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees, Mark Foster; to the Renters Commission, Jordan Else and Jeffrey Lowe's; to the Downtown Development Authority, Jessica Letaw and Thressa Nicholas. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilmember Redina, seconded by Councilmember Harrison. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? They are approved. I'd like to recommend the following nominations for your consideration: to the Zoning Board of Appeals, Grace Whitney; to the Airport Advisory Commission, Frederick Hall and Rosemary Faulkner; to the Renters Commission, Robert Droppelman. like to mention very briefly that I had the opportunity last week to go to Washington, D.C. And attend an event at the Vice President's residence. I was joined there by about 200 of the Vice President's closest friends, many of whom are municipal leaders and state leaders here in the state of Michigan, as well as elsewhere throughout the country. And it was a pleasure talking with many of them about municipal issues with the Vice President. I was able to have a few moments and spoke with her briefly about CA10, which is our purchase, which is off the agenda today due to lack of membership, but will be back with us on the 8th. On the 9th, about CA10 and the importance of the Biden-Harris Inflation Reduction Act, and to enable us to get to a point where we are able to purchase solar panels rather than merely go with the purchase power agreement, and the importance of that for our community. My wife was there as well and got to speak with the second gentleman about his important work with respect to anti-Semitism, work which is plainly and obviously still needed both here in Ann Arbor and throughout the land. In the absence of public hearings, we will move on. We have before us the regular session minutes of December 5, 2022. May I have a motion, please, to approve these minutes? Moved by Councilmember Ira, seconded by Councilmember Watson. Discussion, please, of A1. All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. We missed the consent agenda. Well, that's not good, is it? I think I called A1 and it was called and approved, so with council's acquiescence, let's just pop back to the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please? We have before us the consent agenda, even still. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Adina, seconded by Councilmember Briggs. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Harrison.
I'd like to pull CA13.
CA13. Further discussion of the consent agenda. All in favor of the consent agenda with the exception of CA13, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This consent agenda is approved with the exception of CA13. Well, certainly, and that is all. Without CA13, resolution to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor Police Officers Association effective January 1, 2023 and December 31, 2026. Moved by Councilmember Harrison, second by Councilmember Redina. Discussion, please, of CA13. I believe we have a staff introduction. Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll let my comments build upon the comments that were made earlier this evening by Mr. Doral Hargreaves. Those are very on point with this. I'll make a few comments to provide additional context for what we're doing. Part of the oversight role of ICPOC is to move beyond simply person-to-officer engagements on the street. It is to look at practices and policies, and there are two ways that those are affected. There are certain practices and policies that management can unilaterally do under the management rights clause of a collective bargaining agreement. This is consistent with how collective bargaining works across the United States. The other way that policies and practices are impacted is through actual negotiation at the table between management and the particular labor union. In this case, in order to further facilitate the role that ICPOC was meant to play, we needed to adjust the mechanism by which our scheduling was done or set up for the negotiations. And that means we have an obligation to notify ICPOC in advance before we start bargaining, give ICPOC the opportunity to review the current language of the contract that's in force, give ICPOC the opportunity to make comments on it and to ask us, when you go to the table, please work on these items. And that's what happened in this case. In plain language, ICPOC was concerned about additional accountability. And so one of the things that they wanted to make sure that was addressed is if an officer exhibits a performance that is to use an example, suspendable. In the past, a suspension would stay in an individual's file for a finite amount of time. And so subsequent, when a chief was considering an assignment, a promotion, et cetera, if the finite amount of time had expired, you couldn't consider the fact that the person before you has a suspension or multiple suspensions in their jacket because it's run their course, it's no longer there. As a result of this negotiation, suspensions will now be in the file indefinitely, which gives further accountability, which is ultimately what ICPOC was trying to do. This is good for the police department, it's good for the chief, it's good for the community that we are here to serve. There was the issue of trying to get arbitration out of the contract. In simple terms, the union simply didn't agree to that. But in exchange for that, we got the items that Ms. Todoro Hargreaves mentioned earlier. We've got the suspension language that I just addressed. We have the insertion of alternate dispute resolution or mediation. And the whole issue, the whole concern around arbitration or ensuring that the chief's authority was not usurped, there is concern not just in Ann Arbor, but across the country that if a chief takes the step of removing an officer, there's concern about an arbitrator coming along afterwards and saying that person has to get their job back. And that was the purpose of the request. We made multiple attempts at that item. In the end, it was not going to be included in the bargaining because the union didn't agree to it, but they did agree to several other things. So those are my comments about it. We think this contract enhances transparency, makes a significant step forward in accountability, and the administration does support your support for passage.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Harrison.
Police contract negotiations have had some early involvement with the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. With the leadership of Administrator Dohoney, a place at the table was created, where concerns were heard, evaluated, and responded to. This is a relationship that relies on trust with all involved, from police leadership, the city attorney's office, ICPOC, and the city administrator. ICPOC will continue to ask for fair contracts, additional information, and transparency, and ongoing improvements of police services in our community. The new contract points to all of these elements, most pointedly the ability for the chief to waive progressive discipline for any and all major infractions. Previously, the contract only allowed the chief to waive progressive discipline in 3 instances. This new contract adds 7 more offenses to the list, but notably, the list is not exhaustive and preserves the chief's right to determine what a major infraction is. Overall, the hope is that as conversations continue to develop with what unarmed crisis response can look like, especially now that we have the Supportive Connections Deflection Program and its deflection work, at some point we will have a better picture of all of city staff working in public safety, not just police. As a Black woman with lived experience, which includes some terrifying and humiliating experiences with police, guns drawn, followed through my own neighborhood on my way home, the list goes on. I believe fundamentally that we have to have transparency in policing. We have to hold our police department accountable at a significant level. And when police officers engage in misconduct, we have to have accountability. There should be consequences, and we must have higher professional standards. With each contract negotiation cycle, we intend to make more progress, and this contract is a sign of progress. And while I acknowledge that it's a hot topic that likely will not be fixed at the local level, The elimination of binding arbitration in regard to termination is still a topic in oversight, and I will look to put it back on the table at some point. But for now, we are making progress.
Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. All I want to say is I am so grateful to have Councilmember Harrison here at the table and to have her insight helping us make good decisions. Thank you.
Councilmember Adina.
Thank you. Thanks for the remarks of Councilmember Harrison and Chair Teodoro Hargraves and the administrator. I actually don't have to continue kind of repeating some of the progress that is made in this this contract, but I do want to just thank all of the folks that are involved. As you can hear from the number of remarks tonight, this is a really big task when we're doing these negotiations, and particularly with our police contracts, there are a lot of different individuals involved. And so to the members of ICPOC and members of staff, our interim chief, and then also to the officers themselves who embraced some of this progress by approving this contract and making sure that we are all moving together towards this increased accountability. I just want to thank all those involved, and I look forward to supporting it.
Further discussion? I would like to add my thanks to the staff members up and down the line, both in legal and administration, of course, too, with the in our Police Officers Association for working together to make this contract happen. I'd like to thank members of ICPOC, both past and present, too, for their important and constructive engagement to get this contract to where it is today. And where it is today, as has been stated, is an improvement. It provides important transparency and accountability benefits, and it also, for officers, provides a number of very important pay equalization and reasonableization. It is a contract that will make our department stronger and make our community, I believe, better. Further and finally, I guess I want to just chat very briefly and communicate to the public in the time that I have remaining a little bit about the context of police-fire negotiations in the municipal environment. Just so that folks know, one aspect of police-fire negotiations is that we operate under Act 312. Act 312 essentially puts both officers, officer unions and municipalities in a position where disagreements of various kinds between bargaining units where there is no resolution are not settled among the parties. They are settled by appeal to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator's decision with respect to the context of the contract is binding. And so in all public services negotiations, that third party is, although not physically present in the room, they are present in the room, and what the various public safety unions look for, and what the various municipal leaders look for, both here in the city and elsewhere throughout Michigan, all take that into context as we move forward and decide how best to move forward. Here in this context, how we have decided best to move forward is indeed by moving forward. It's a contract that is good for our officers who come to work every day in an effort to make our community safer, and it's good for our community with the benefit of increased transparency and accountability. And to each and all, I extend my thanks. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. Having done the minutes, let's just gracefully step over that and say we're now at C1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Purchasing, Selling, and Contracting Procedure of Title I of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor related to the Best Value Procurement Program, moved by Councilmember Iyer, seconded by Councilmember Briggs. Discussion, please, of C1. Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. When we passed our Best Value Contracting Policy and started implementing it earlier this year. So we passed it in late last year and have had about a year now that we've been working with it. it was understood at this table that we would spend a year working through it and determining if there were any little tweaks that needed to be made to address unforeseen situations that might come up. And so that's what we see before us, is the result of a year's worth of successfully using this policy and also determining which parts of it needed a little bit of refinement. I really want to thank our city administrator and John, John, I will pronounce your name correctly, Fournier. I have a hard time with that. For especially Mr. Fournier for his work on this, really digging into the details and trying to maintain fealty to what our goals were as a council. And that's reflected in these amendments that you see to the policy, particularly with respect to the use of 1099 workers. That was something that we didn't even think of here as a body, but Mr. Fournier came up with, knowing what our goal was, which is to make sure that people are paid, people who do work for the city are paid full-time wages and benefits, and that the over-reliance and the sort of skirting, cutting corners by using 1099 employees was against that, and that we hadn't addressed it. And so here it is now as an amendment to the policy to be included. So I really appreciate that. The one aspect of it that I continue to just want to make sure that we all understand, there's the part about raising the threshold to $50,000. And if you see in the memo, the language is kind of around large firms versus small firms. That isn't always the case. There are certainly small firms that can fill out this best value, the criteria, no problem. As an example, there are many electrical contracting firms that just have a few employees who, do participate in registered apprenticeship programs. So it's not necessarily about that, but about, the types of work that these contracts call for.
Further discussion? Councilmember Iyer.
So I will just continue. Just to wrap up, thanks to everyone for your work on this, and I look forward to voting for it and continuing to refine and perfect this process as we go.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC1, resolution to appoint Julie Lynch to the Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees. Moved by Councilmember Ghazi Edwin, seconded by Councilmember Briggs. Discussion, please, of DC1. All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC2, resolution to approve Kristen Cato for the Renters Commission and appoint Jamie Tibbetts. Moved by Councilmember Redina, seconded by Councilmember Harrison. Discussion, please, of DC2. Councilmember Redina.
Thanks. Just very briefly, I wanted to point this out because it is not very often that we're voting to remove and replace someone. Commissioner Cato was somebody that during the initial process we were really looking forward to engaging at the commission level, and for whatever reason has no longer been able to serve. And so due to absences and numerous attempts to try to re-engage the commissioner, unfortunately the commission had to make the recommendation to remove her and replace her so that we could make sure we had quorum at our meetings. And so look forward to the new addition and continuing this work. Thanks.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC3, resolution to appoint Anya Dale and Macy Waig to the Environmental Commission. Moved by Councilmember Iyer, second by Councilmember Briggs. Discussion of DC3. Councilmember Briggs.
Just very briefly, I wanted to say thanks basically to all these folks who are willing to serve and continue serving on our commissions, and those who are already serving on our commissions. I think that there's hundreds of folks, and if I'm correct, on all of our commissions, if you add them up, and they do a great service to our community, so thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC4, resolution to adopt the revised fiscal year 2023 City Council Legislative Policy Agenda, moved by Councilmember Udina, seconded by Councilmember Iyer. Discussion, please, of DC4. Councilmember Iyer, sorry.
Thank you. Just by way of a little bit of background on this, the Council Policy Agenda Committee had recommended and council adopted earlier this year a policy agenda. But with the change in leadership that's coming, with the Democrats taking over both the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years in Michigan, we needed to do quite a redo of our policy agenda. Now, fortunately, we already had approved quite a long list of sort of a wish list of everything that we hoped we could accomplish in Michigan, and then we refined it under the Republican legislature to the things that were actually somewhat maybe feasible. But again, with that change, it was time to go back to the full wish list and really come to our lobbying firm with and our local legislators with a what should be a very realistic list of items that we can see accomplished under a Democratic majority. And I think it's important to remember as a bit of history that 40 years ago, Democrats lost the majority, in part because, in the face of constant recall threats from Republicans, they became too timid to take on big issues. And so when they finally regained control in January, I believe, Democrats need to take immediate, bold action on issues that should be easy right out of the gate: repealing right to work, reinstating prevailing wage, amending Elliott-Larsen to include LGBTQ rights and protections, reenacting polluter pay, passing tax cuts for working families, and repealing the retirement tax. Those are all included in our new policy agenda priorities. There are other issues in there that are going to be a little bit more difficult, just because they will require some work, things that we're hoping for in terms of supporting our sustainability goals and our climate action goals. But it's important for Democrats to know that, they've been telling loyal constituencies in the labor, environmental, and social justice movements, for years, if only we had the power. So now they and we have the power, and I'm hoping they will use it. And I think this policy agenda document is a strong message to our local legislators for what we hope they will accomplish.
Further discussion, Councilmember Udina.
Thank you. I just want to echo a little bit of what Councilmember Iyer was saying, and also thank her for chairing our Policy Agenda Commission and our committee, and leading a lot of this work with staff. As she mentioned, we had a very exhaustive list of issues, and so I think it's also really just important to highlight that the document that we're actually voting on is not exhaustive. It is despite its I joked previously, despite its heft, it is actually a short list of the things that we would like to see accomplished. And so we will continue to keep our eyes on things in Lansing, and as we see opportunities to support legislation that fits with our city's values, or to advance things that weren't previously listed in this, we can continue to do things like bring resolutions back to this body like we have in the past. I do also want to echo some of the urgency around making some advancements towards this list and other democratic policies that really have been building up for 40 years while we've been waiting to regain control in Lansing. There's a lot of work to do, and I am really excited about our new legislative delegation who have been very engaged with us to learn about the priorities of the city, have been communicating with staff and our lobbyists, and are really willing to get to work and help partner with us so that we can make some pretty significant strides towards enacting some of our policy goals. So I just want to thank everybody who was involved in this and continue looking forward to working with our partners in Lansing to make sure that our city can continue to advance some of the goals that have been stalled for too long. Thanks.
Further discussion? I'd like to echo my thanks both to obviously the folks who have been on the Legislative Policy Committee, past and present, to staff for working and coordinating with our new and expanded Washington delegation. There is a great deal of opportunity, but we must opportunity to to improve the lot of Michiganders generally and municipal organizations specifically. And it's my hope that we will be able and have the opportunity to work with our colleagues in Lansing to realize those opportunities. It will be important for Ann Arborites for decades to come. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC 5, resolution to approve contract amendment number 9 to the service contract with Recycle Ann Arbor for municipal resource recovery services for an extension of 1 2-month period. Estimated amount, $207,773 for the 2 months of the contract. Moved by Councilmember Radina, seconded by Councilmember Harrison. Discussion, please, of DC 5. Very briefly, we are in the midst of conversations with Recycle Ann Arbor about services moving forward. Our contract is expiring in January, and the purpose of this is, as you might have gathered from the title, to create an extension of 1 2-month period for those conversations to continue. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. Ms. Cord, do we have the pleasure of a closed session today?
No, Mayor, no request. Thank you.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Watson, second by Councilmember Ghazi Edwin. Discussion, please, of the clerk's report. All in favor? Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. Do we have communications today from our city attorney?
No, thank you.
There is no public comment overflow, and so may I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by. Moved by Councilmember Radina, second by Councilmember Ghazi Edwin. Discussion. One point of it's uncommon to discuss during motions to adjourn, but if I may briefly, it has been observed that the City Council meeting ordinarily, which would be on our first Monday of the month, is now for January on the second Monday of the month. It has been further observed that is the night of the NCAA Football National Championship. Should the stars align and should Michigan be in that championship, and good Lord, should Ohio State also be in that championship, I guess I'd suggest that council members be on the lookout for a special meeting to perhaps change the time and place, or rather change the date of that meeting, because so that's if council will forgive the off-topic discussion of our motion to adjourn. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.